What would you do if your favorite hobby turned into your worst nightmare? My name is Paul, and this fishing trip with my best friends started as a peaceful retreat, but quickly spiraled into chaos. The sun dipped low, casting eerie shadows across the water, and a creeping sense of fear wrapped around us. Do you dare to know what happened next? It was a sunny morning, the kind that makes you think of nothing but calm water and perfect fishing. My friends and I were brimming with excitement as we loaded our gear onto the boat, laughter mingling with the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. Everything felt just right, like the universe had aligned to give us the perfect day. As we cruised toward our favorite fishing spot, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling deep in my stomach, an unease creeping over me like a dark shadow. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the early hour and my senses being overly heightened, but it gnawed at me. Glancing over the side of the boat, the water looked so inviting, reflecting the sun's golden rays. Yet beneath that shimmering surface, I could have sworn something lurked just beyond sight, watching us. The chatter faded softly as we neared our destination, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I watched my friends casting out lines, their faces lit with anticipation, while I stared into the water, feeling a sense of dread growing heavier like a fog rolling in. I remembered the stories I'd heard, how fishing trips sometimes took a dark turn, tales of fishermen disappearing without a trace, swallowed by the depths. The tranquil scene began to feel oppressive, the light around us dimming ever so slightly as clouds floated in, blocking the sun. It was still warm, but the air had changed. That calm water, once so inviting, now felt like a deceptive mirror hiding secrets below. I tried to laugh with my friends to ease the tension coiling in my gut, but I felt a chill settle in, a creeping dread that our day might not be as memorable as we'd planned. It was one of those perfect afternoons. The sky was bright and the sun danced on the water's surface like a million tiny sparks. We anchored in our usual spot, the sound of water lapping against the boat almost soothing. But as the hours slipped by, an unsettling feeling began to seep into the corners of my mind, tugging at me like a faint whisper in the wind. At first, it was just little things, an unusual amount of weed snagging our fishing lines, twisting them into tangled knots. We laughed about it, chalking it up to bad luck. But even then, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as if eyes were gazing from beneath the surface. I'd glance over the edge, but all I saw was the shimmering water, hiding who knew what below. Nightmares quietly slithered into my thoughts, but I pushed them away, wanting to enjoy the day with my friends. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the situation worsened. Our fishing equipment started malfunctioning, reels that had worked perfectly for years jammed at the most inopportune moments, causing us to fumble around with a growing sense of frustration. It was during one of those moments that I caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of movement just beneath the surface. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed, my voice tinged with urgency. My friends brushed it off with laughter, teasing me for being overly paranoid. "It's just your imagination, Paul," one of them chuckled, rolling his eyes. But the growing unease gnawed at me, tightening its grip. Shadows danced beneath the waves, fleeting and elusive, while the light waned, creating an eerie contrast with their laughter. The air thickened with an unnameable dread, yet they carried on oblivious. I turned back to the water, where a dark insignia rippled across the surface, sending chills down my spine. It was only the beginning, but I could feel the weight of something uninvited lurking in the depths. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, the tranquil charm of our fishing trip began to warp into something darker, something I wasn't prepared for. The air grew inexplicably cold. I shivered, though it wasn't just the drop in temperature that set me on edge. Unnatural noises rolled across the water, a mix of distant splashes and faint whispers that didn't quite belong in the serene landscape we had enjoyed all day. At first, we brushed it off as just the wind rustling through the trees, or maybe the call of some secluded creature. But as the darkness crept in, that explanation felt hollow, like a bad joke lingering on the tongue. The sounds morphed into something more sinister, an unsettling cacophony that pricked at our nerves. That was when Joe gave a shout, his excitement quickly twisting into panic. A violent yank on his fishing rod had him teetering at the edge of the boat, nearly pulled overboard. The commotion shifted our focus entirely. We all turned to him, hearts racing as we gathered around, watching him struggle, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the rod like a lifeline. "Help me!" Joe yelled, his voice strained and laced with sheer adrenaline. The tension surged among us, thick as fog, every glance exchanged heavy with unspoken dread. It didn't feel like a simple catch anymore. Something was out there, something that shouldn't be. I glanced over the side of the boat, half expecting to see something lurking just beneath the surface. The water was an inky black now, swallowing the last rays of daylight. I squinted, searching for any movement, any sign of what was tugging at Joe's line with such ferocity. Each tug seemed insistent, almost malevolent, as if whatever was down there was aware of us, and our lives held little value in its realm. Fear coursed through me like ice. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. It was no longer about the relaxing escape we had hoped for. It had turned into a fight for our sanity, poised on the brink of an unraveling I could sense in my bones. This wasn't just fishing. It was becoming a chilling encounter with the unexpected dangers lurking beneath the surface. As we leaned over the side of the boat trying to make sense of what had pulled on Joe's line, the water felt eerily alive. Straining my eyes against the encroaching darkness, I caught a glimpse of something beneath the surface, a dark shadow gliding just beneath where the moonlight faltered. My stomach turned. It wasn't just the darkness. It moved too quickly, almost as if it were deliberately evading us. "Did you see that?" Joe's voice cracked barely above a whisper as he recoiled and stumbled back against the boat's edge. Before I could respond, just as swiftly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished into the depths. Then, without warning, Joe was flung backward with a force that knocked the wind out of him. The fishing rod snapped in half, the line breaking like twine, his face a mask of confusion and fear. Panic surged. "What was that?" I shouted, but my question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy, like fog rolling in. Joe scrambled to regain his footing, his heart racing with primal instinct. The dim light from our lantern quivered, casting dancing shadows within the boat, reflecting our own rising dread. "Start the engine," he yelled, urgency thick in his voice. I turned and yanked the ignition cord, desperate to feel the reassuring roar of the motor, but it sputtered and died, as if mocking us. Frustration twisted into fear as I tried again and again, each failed attempt adding weight to the oppressive atmosphere. "It's like it's dead." I felt the apprehension in my voice as the reality sank in. The boat was drifting farther from shore, and the serene lake, now cloaked in darkness, felt like an endless abyss. We were marooned in the middle of an unknown, sinister domain. Joe glanced over his shoulder, his expression a mix of determination and terror. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice rough with adrenaline. "But where do you run when the very water surrounding you seems to pulse with an ominous life of its own?" An unsettling silence enveloped us, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the hull. Yet somehow, it felt like the lake itself was holding its breath, waiting for the real horror to unfold. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had yanked Joe's rod was watching us, lurking just beneath the surface, biding its time. Panic gripped us as our eyes darted around, searching for answers in the chaos that had erupted. In that moment, a thick, eerie mist began to rise from the water, curling upwards like ghostly fingers. It wrapped around our boat, engulfing us in a frigid embrace. I swear the cold sank deep into my bones, an unnatural chill that made me shiver uncontrollably. The mist carried whispers, soft but undeniably chilling. It was as if the water itself was trying to communicate or warn us. I leaned in closer, straining to catch the words, but they danced just out of reach, slipping through my fingers like sand. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but my voice felt so small against the sinister backdrop of the unfolding nightmare. Sarah, wide-eyed and shaking, pointed into the fog. My heart raced as I followed her gaze, dread pooling in my stomach. Floating toward us was a wooden plank, drifting almost effortlessly atop the glassy surface. There was something profoundly unsettling about it, an instinctual warning that this was not just debris lost from a boat. It bore strange symbols, carved so meticulously that they seemed alive, pulsating with an ancient energy. "What do you think it mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But deep down, I felt we were better off not knowing. The symbols were twisted and obscure, each stroke of the knife in the wood hinting at dark secrets and untold horrors. I couldn't help but imagine what might have dwelled here long before our laughter disrupted the stillness of that evening. Katie, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly blurted out, "We should get out of here, now." Her voice cut through the whispers in my mind. I could see the fear in her eyes, mirroring my own. But as the mist thickened, it began to distort our surroundings, swallowing the shoreline whole. It was like being lost in a dream, a haunting illusion that tugged at something primal within us. My instinct screamed for us to flee as shadows danced just beyond the mist's edge, mingling with the whispers that grew louder, more demanding. We were not alone. This wasn't just a fishing trip gone wrong. It was something darker, a chilling encounter with the supernatural, something ancient that had awakened from its rest. As we tried to shake off the unease from the mist and the wooden plank, the atmosphere shifted suddenly. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible tremor in the water, yet every ripple felt charged with dark energy. My heart raced, each beat a reminder that we might not be alone out here. I remember glancing at Sarah. Her face had drained of color as she peered nervously into the depths. It was unnerving, truly. The water, smooth and glassy, began to churn without warning, undulating with an unsettling rhythm as if something beneath was awakening. I turned to the others looking for reassurance, but the expressions on their faces mirrored my own growing dread. Then, without any warning, it happened. Sarah screamed suddenly, her cry slicing through the tension like glass shattering. I turned just in time to see her get pulled under, an unseen force dragging her into the chilling abyss. Panic surged through us like an electric shock. We leapt to the edge of the boat, frantically grasping at her arm, but it felt like trying to hold on to a wisp of smoke. "Help, pull me up," she gasped. Her eyes wide with terror, the color drained from her face. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach, the horror of the situation anchoring me in place. The rest of us scrambled, our fingers clawing desperately at the wet, icy skin of her arms. The force pulling her was relentless and incredibly strong, as if the very depths of the lake were plotting to claim her. "Sarah, hold on!" I shouted, my voice cracking, mirroring the panic that had erupted among us. We pulled with all our might, muscles straining, heartbeats thundering in our chests, but the water continued to roil around us, mocking our efforts. The very air felt different, heavy and thick with palpable fear. I could hear a distant whisper echoing through the mist, the words indecipherable yet strangely familiar, a haunting, unnatural chorus urging us to let go. As we tugged, I could feel the icy grip of whatever had ensnared her, a cold, clammy hand creeping along my wrist. Was it just my imagination, or something far more sinister? Finally, with one last desperate heave, we yanked her back onto the boat, crashing onto the wooden floor like a rag doll. Sarah gasped for air, her wide eyes filled with unfathomable terror. "I felt icy hands pulling me down," she stammered, her words heavy with dread. The reality of her experience plunged into the pit of my stomach, an icy echo of the unseen horror lurking just below the surface. We were in a fight for survival now, a battle against forces that defied explanation, clawing at our sanity with the promise of ungraspable darkness. I remember the moment we pulled Sarah from the water, her eyes wild and frantic, and the panic weighing down on all of us like a thick fog. We did our best to comfort her, our voices trembling in the stillness of the night, but the tremors of fear weren't just coming from her. It was then, in the eerie silence that followed, that one of my friends, Jake, discovered something beneath the seat, a soaked journal, pages warped and crinkled as if they'd been submerged for ages. Curiosity edged out our fear, and instinctively we gathered around him. The dim light of our lantern flickered, casting unsettling shadows that danced in a chaotic rhythm against the trees as Jake gingerly opened the cover. The pages felt heavy with time, soaked not just in water but in a history that made my skin crawl. As he began to read, a chill crept up my spine. Each entry was steeped in dread, recounting stories of fishermen who had ventured into these very waters only to vanish without a trace. Those words felt like a noose tightening around my throat. "The curse of the lake," one entry warned, detailing how the fishermen had ignored the signs, enticed by the seductive whispers in the night, clearly referring to the same alluring calls we had brushed off as fish surfacing. "Guys, listen to this." Jake's voice trembled as he read the descriptions that matched our own encounters with disturbing precision. The yanks on our rods, those insistent tugs I had dismissed as particularly hungry fish, now felt more sinister. Dark shapes lurked in the water, shadows that writhed just beneath the surface, always out of sight, but never out of reach. As he continued, my heart raced. The journal spoke of misty apparitions that emerged with dusk, ghostly figures that beckoned the unsuspecting to join them in the depths. A knot formed deep in my stomach as the thought crossed my mind. Were we unknowingly caught in the web of a tale that had begun long before we even arrived? Every unsettling word hung in the air, a heavy reminder of our vulnerability in these cursed waters. I could feel an icy breath at the nape of my neck, the sensation that we were not alone, that the lake had eyes and ears that were watching, waiting. "Guys, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might provoke whatever haunted this place. It was too late for our ignorance. We had danced with danger, and the lingering threads of the past were pulling us into a horror we couldn't escape. As the seconds dragged on, an unbearable tension coiled around us. We were trapped, adrift in a nightmare that was only getting worse. The engine, the lifeline that could have brought us back to safety, sputtered and fell silent. My heart raced as I glanced at my friends, their faces pale, mirrored reflections of my own rising panic. The mist wrapped around us like a shroud, thick and suffocating, and I could barely see more than an arm's length in any direction. "Keep trying," I urged, my voice quivering as I yanked on the starter cord again. It wouldn't budge. It felt like we were fighting against the very air, weighted down by a lurking presence that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. Just then it came, the whispers. They floated through the damp air, chilling and indecipherable at first, but layers of malice seeped from each word as they grew louder, wrapping around us like tendrils of dread. "Do you hear that?" someone murmured, eyes darting around the fog searching for the source. I nodded, my mouth dry, eyes wide. It felt like the very essence of the forest was alive, watching, waiting. Just then, out of the swirling depths of the water, a dark figure began to emerge. My breath hitched in my throat as I took in its presence, a ghastly silhouette, a twisted amalgamation of shadows and malicious intent. The whispers coalesced into a sinister chorus, growing louder, as if the very entity was drawing strength from our fear. It felt like it was feeding off us, feeding off our terror, intensifying its dark energy into something far more threatening. The water rippled unnaturally, as if rallying behind the creature. We were no longer just a group of friends on a fishing trip. We were prey. I looked at my friends, eyes wide with panic and desperation. "We need to get out of here now." My voice broke the trance-like hold the figure had on us, and in that moment, clarity struck. We had to act fast, or we would become nothing more than whispers in this fog, lost to the trees and shadows. If we were going to survive, we needed a plan, and we needed it immediately. Panic gripped my chest as I fumbled with the boat's engine, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. Each second felt like an eternity. Our breaths quickened, urging the boat to awaken as dread rooted us in place. The dark figure loomed larger through the thickening mist, its presence a cold weight in the air, feeding off our terror. I could see it now, pale and twisted, an abstraction of something once human. "Come on, please, just start!" I yelled, desperation filtering through my voice. My hands trembled as I twisted the ignition switch yet again, the engine protesting with a pathetic cough before falling silent. I turned to look at my friends, eyes wide and glistening with fear. They mirrored my own hopelessness. Then I saw it, a brief flicker in the dials, some sign of life amidst the chaos. My heart skipped as I gritted my teeth and pulled the cord again. This time the engine sputtered violently before roaring to life in a cacophony of sound, a symphony of survival. The relief was palpable, yet we wasted no time. The moment we were free from the clutches of that cursed water, I pulled the throttle, and the boat surged forward as if it were instinctively outrunning its shadow. Adrenaline coursed through me, blurring the line between fear and exhilaration. As we sped into the dimming light, the mist began to lift, and I dared to glance back. That dark figure was still there, a haunting silhouette etched against the fading glow, watching us with an intensity that sent chills racing down my spine. We finally reached the shore, and as the boat scraped against the gravel, we stumbled out, our legs unsteady from the ordeal. Gasping for air, we turned to look at the boat one last time, our minds racing with unspoken fears and confusion. "We can never come back," I murmured, a shiver running through me. Our fishing trip had unraveled into a terrifying escape, a bitter reminder of the vulnerability we faced even in the simplest pursuits. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was still trailing us, lurking just beyond the edges of our normal lives. To this day, the memory of that fishing trip haunts us. We thought we were simply enjoying a day of fun, casting our lines into calm waters, with laughter floating on the breeze. but we returned with a chilling story that still sends shivers down my spine. Those shadows beneath the surface weren't just fish. They were reminders of something darker. We urge everyone to tread carefully, for the waters hide more than just fish. A seemingly innocent fishing trip can transform into a nightmare, and I can't shake the fear of what might still be lurking beneath the tide. As the darkness envelops us, leaving us to question every shadow, I can't help but wonder, were you tempted to look over your shoulder during our harrowing tale? If you have your own bone-chilling encounters, share them below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you're hungry for more hauntings that linger long after the screen goes dark, subscribe now and join our circle of the haunted. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's lurking just beyond the next video. Thank you for joining us and stay safe out there.